Well, good afternoon and good morning, wherever you are on the face of the world. Welcome one more time to your show here, Sankofa, your host, Maponga Joshua, where we are basically looking at our beautiful historical past, trying to make sense of our present day and focusing again into the future that we are moving into. And if there is anything we're trying to do here on Sankofa, it is to build a strong historical appreciation of the continent, a strong historical appreciation of our own land. We want to celebrate our history, we want to celebrate our culture, we want to celebrate our music, we want to celebrate our art and our foods, we want to investigate and interrogate the governance systems. We want basically for the African child, the Keblam child, to begin to have a clear understanding as to who were we before they told us who we are. And for this morning, we're going to have this session running in two sessions. I'm going to do a small little brief lecture on behalf of the Afrikan Continent, having a look at basically our historical past. And then the second half, we're going to be having our guest with us all the way from Dimona, that is Sar Ahmadiel, who will be joining us in studio to give us a quick rundown, brief history of who are the Hebrew people, the formation of the biblical text, the melanin people, and how do we all get connected as the greater Afrikan Bantu people to form what we now are being called as Africans. But maybe just to look backwards again, it will be important for us to firstly begin to appreciate that our history as Africans is written on stone, or it is written in stone. We trace our history not only to the invasion of colonialism. Our history is not founded in the writings of the Europeans and the colonizers from the Berlin Conference, the division and the breaking of Africa into segments. Our history is illustrious. Our history is beautiful. And if a people does not know their history, if people do not know their history, most likely they'll never know where they are. And it is very true, therefore, to say when you don't know where you're coming from, you will not know where you are, and you will not know where you're going. It is important for us once in a while to stop and reflect so that we can re-educate ourselves, inform each other. And it's unfortunate again to say much, and if not many, if not most of the history that we celebrate as African people has been written by Europeans. And you and I know very well that history will always have the complexion of the one who is writing it. Therefore, if a lion goes to write the history about the bush, the history will be him as a conqueror, him who becomes the victor, him who becomes the warrior, him who becomes victorious. And the people that he's writing about will always end up becoming sideline footnotes in their own history. When you look back at the genesis of Africa, as we looked last week, the genesis of the greater Bantu people in the great Guru Swa, some might call it Guru Swa, some might call it Sese Islands, some might call it Embo. But it looks like this history is founded in the greater space of what we call Eden. What is Eden? Eden is Africa. Eden is Al-Keblam. Because even when you read your Bible text, it will tell you that, and God planted a garden east of Eden. Then you need to find the geographical location of Eden before you can begin to find out where is east of Eden, where the smaller garden was put. And from this smaller garden, therefore, that's where the plants and the crops were being taken to plant and populate the entire creation. If you're supposed to use the biblical text as your basis of discussing the genesis and the beginning of the humankind, what brings us into existence. So it looks like our history begins in the Great Lake region, the Great Lake region. Because when you look at the migration of the Bantu tribes, the Bantu people, we seem to have been moving from the Great Lake region. And by the Lake region, I mean the Lake Victoria's there, around Nile rivers, in the shadows of the Mount Kilimanjaro, the greater Uganda area, the greater Kenya area, that whole plain. Again, while we are saying that, we want to remember that Eden itself does not have borders. Eden has rivers that populate the greater space of the African continent. Therefore, you find that from the Great Lake region, there seem to have been about 3 to 4 movements that happened from there. The first movement that came out of the Sese Islands, Nelubale, sounds from the great waters, as the king was telling us last week, from the great waters of the Nile River at the placenta, the embryo, the embo right where the Nile River bubbles out of Lake Victoria, around that area. History and folklore story tell us that the first group that left that were the nomads. And who are the nomads? This speaks to the great tribes of the Aborigines. We are speaking to the great tribes of the Khoisan and all the wanderers who are in the islands, who up to date, when you go to your biological classes, they still remain with some of the oldest genes of humankind. The oldest genes of humankind are found in these nomadic tribes. That will include from the south, down south, you have the Khoisans, the Aborigines in Australia, and the others that are in the islands of the Great Pacific. After the great movement of the nomads, the second group is that of the builders, the masons as they call them. The masons will include, therefore, the builders of the great pyramids of Giza, the builders of the great pyramids of Sudan, the pyramids of Nigeria, and all that build kingdoms. In Peru, you still find builders there. In the great European space, you also find emblems and features of great constructions that are found there. This moves then to another wave of those that we call, therefore, the builders or the masons. And from the masons, you have great architecture that we find there. Then the third group that came out of there becomes those we call the farmers, and those that were tilling the land. That moved out from there again. This now speaks to all the kingdoms that started building, planting and plowing and keeping livestock and etc. Then when you therefore begin to look at the greater expanse of the Kemetic knowledge system, that Kemet is not actually the first one. Therefore, you have the wanderers. After the wanderers, you have the nomads. After the nomads, then you have Abyssinians. After Abyssinians, then you have Kemet. And after Kemet, then you would have what we call the Greeks. And after the Greeks, you have the Romans. After the Romans, then you have the Anglo-Saxons. After the Anglo-Saxons, then you're talking of colonization to where we have now. I'm trying to give you just a quick background of where our history comes from, our remembered history. But way beyond that, there could be other pieces of history that we might not have in our hands. But what is important, what I want to highlight, is that those who have these folklore stories, interesting old stories, people sit around when someone makes statements, then they want to sit around and start cutting and pasting and lacerating and criticizing information. The issue is not about criticizing information. It's us bringing all these pockets of information together and begin to rewrite our own history. But the first and foremost, where we would find the African history written will now become Kemet. And Kemet is number 4. Kemet is not the oldest. Before Kemet, you need to account for Abyssinia. And before Abyssinia, you need to account for the wanderers. And from the wanderers, then you come back to the beginning, which is the greater history that we find in Elubale, which is the history of the great Embos, the great Bantus, the great Bantu nations. Therefore, but when you begin to look, for example, if you come down south to the kingdoms of Mwene Mtapa, who is the builders of the great ruins of Zimbabwe, you would find that in the great hinterlands of southern Africa, this is as far up as Tanzania and as lower down as South Africa here, you have 180 sites that almost have the same civilization like the one you find in the great Zimbabwe, the great ruins. And the biggest of them all, or the largest of them all, the greatest of them all, it becomes the great Zimbabwe, which had almost 180 smaller sites that you find around the world. People are still quarreling in universities whether Mapungubwe is older than Zimbabwe or Zimbabwe is older than Mapungubwe. I'm not going to be interested in that, because again, in the midst of that, it is national politics where one nation wants to say we are older than the other. But looking at the vastness of the great Zimbabwe kingdom, the great Zimbabwe kingdom, Zimbabwe, meaning a house built of stone. This kingdom starts right up in the basins of Muchena tribes in Mozambique, stretching out into the ruins you find in Domboshava, that is in Botswana. I happen to have been there. Mapungubwe down in South Africa, I happen to have been there. The Kami ruins in Bulawayo. You get into Zambia, you get into Angola, and other parts of Malawi, you still find these ruins that are there. Almost telling us that whether Mapungubwe is older than the great Zimbabwe, that becomes immaterial. But what we know is that the largest and the biggest of these kingdoms in the south, you have to be talking of the kingdom of the great Zimbabwe. Therefore, if you're supposed to be talking of nationalities or countries, we are all one big tribe in the south. Yes, you have the Embo kingdom, which moved further down in terms of the migration to form up what we now may call the great Nguni, Angoni tribes, and the great tribes of the mountains, the Basutus and the Swazis. You combine that together with the kingdoms of Mozambique, the Shanganis, the kingdoms of the Vendas with the Ngomadungundu. You put that together with the Botswana tribes. You move into the Namibian space. You combine that with the Lozi tribes of Zambia, come back into Zambia, into Malawi, and you combine all these huge tribes in the great historical past. You begin to have what we might want to call the Great Munumtapa Kingdom, with the great kingdom again that you find in the kingdoms of Congo, the beautiful tribes, the Chitikulus and the Mutimkulus, and the greater Congo tribes and kingdoms that are found there. And you move further up into the Uganda tribes, the Baganda. Then you combine them together with the Kikuyus and the Luos in Kenya. You combine them again with the Tanzanian tribes. You want to collect a bit of that until you get to the great Ethiopian civilization. There you'll find waiting for you the great temples of the cities of Ethiopia that are standing to date, carved out of rocks in the mountains of Ethiopia. Beautiful art history, and even the concept of Christianity. You cannot discuss Christianity again without discussing Abyssinia and studying and reading through the Ethiopian history. They remain with one of the oldest and richest texts of history as to how the Bible text, which now Christianity, on the 6th or 7th civilization, which we call Christianity, was actually founded and molded and designed in the greater kingdoms of Ethiopia. And once you talk Ethiopia, you cannot miss and talk about Ethiopian history, we again without mentioning Haile Selassie, looking into the histories of Solomon's and David, and how the entire Middle East, what you might want to call Middle East, which is North Africa, is actually involved and occupied, contained, and actually the history of Africa is a combination of the interaction between the Africans themselves.
Algerian flags fly half-mast as the country mourns for the 257 people killed in the country's worst plane disaster. The military transporter plane crashed on Wednesday after takeoff in southwest Algiers. Most of the dead were soldiers and their families.
You know that Sudan actually has more pyramids than Egypt has. Yes, Sudan has more pyramids than Egypt has pyramids. Meaning to say that the civilization of Kemet did not only end up in Egypt, but of course Egypt has been commercialized, and everyone talks about pyramids, Egypt comes to mind. I have a surprise for you. Sudan has more pyramids than Egypt has. And just when you thought you had it all, you move over further into Nigeria. Nigeria has pyramids also, ancient pyramids, to show us that the civilization of the great Kemetic space did not only end up being contained in Egypt, but it spread out through the southern and coming down. What is even interesting, if you look on my head very carefully, you begin to see that African culture, in terms of our art form, would constantly have these designs that you look at. And when you look at them very carefully and closely, you find that the concept again of the pyramids, the three-legged triangle, the three stones that we put when we are cooking, become a constant feature that appears on most of the African art forms. And these pyramids, again, that you see on our designs in terms of our art form, celebrate again our common history, that we actually, all of us, have this Kemetic connection that puts us all together. Another kingdom that would be fascinating to you again, for you to study, is the great establishment of the kingdoms of Benin. Benin, yes. This beautiful city that is almost designed like a spaceship, with a river that was flowing around the city, with a concentric zone model. Those of you who have done geography. Well-designed city, a cosmopolitan city. And history has it that many cities of the world, including the design of the Vatican City itself, actually the design of that city was actually a photocopy or a plagiarism or a simulation of the great city and civilization of Benin. Therefore, you have right in the north side and the northwest, you have the Benin kingdoms and the great tribes of Nigeria, the Igbo tribes, the great tribes of Nigeria, the Hausas. You have the kingdoms of the great Nile, the Blue Nile and the White Nile. And moving further into we cannot miss again to have a conversation around Timbuktu, which with the great kings that lived on the continent, such as Mansa Musa, the first billionaire, the richest man who has ever lived on the face of the earth, by the name of Mansa Musa, from the kingdoms of Mali, who had gold, and he created civilizations, and he developed the countries right up north, the industries, businesses, and commerce around the whole Sahara deserts that you find up north there. Therefore, Africa for me becomes this beautiful map that is scattered with this beautiful historical information that stares us in the eye. And when you look into these technologies, there you find that our architecture has been preserved, our art form has been preserved, our writings have been preserved. The oldest writing that we can even think about is that of hieroglyphics. Before you can talk about Hebrew and Greek and Aramaic, all these writings, you need to start learning that the Africans were writing on the stones. So you find that the Egyptian writings are these pictures that you find, which they call hieroglyphics. So actually Africans are the mothers and the progenitors, the genesis of all writing that you may end up finding. And there in Egypt, again, another historical factor you might want to consider also are the libraries of Alexandria. The libraries of Alexandria, which were banned in the early centuries. And they were banned for one or two reasons. Politically banned, but not only that, but the books that were found there were taken out of Alexandria and they were moved into Europe. And the rumors have it that many of the writers, such as Plato, such as Aristotle, and some of these European scholars, as we call them, or European philosophers, as you call them, were actually plagiarizing the writings that were found in Alexandria. There's even another rumor also that goes on to say the writings of William Shakespeare and some of the poets and grand poets that are celebrated in the West, that these stories that they are writing about were actually plagiarism of the great African story. Therefore, the African story is not as small as we think. In fact, according to Professor Nsingisa, the only civilization that we have is the Kemetic civilization. The only civilization that we have is Kemet. All other civilizations are actually a photocopy, a duplication, a plagiarism, and a photocopy of the greater African history. Therefore, when we celebrate and look back in our history, we begin to understand who are we as a people. And some of our modern young people, when they look at us and says, how can you be celebrating history? Because Africans never even designed one little thing. Africans never designed one little technology. You want again to do your research correctly and find out many of the civilizations, many of the technologies that we are celebrating today, be it computers, be it formulas. I mean, look at the Egyptian pyramids, look at the pyramids in Sudan, and the mathematical formulas that you find there. When you understand your history, then you are able to appreciate your history and embrace that history. This whole concept of studying Kemetic history forms under something they call alchemy. Alchemy, which is Kemet knowledge, where you find us understanding how weather works, understanding how planets are named. You get to some tribes in Mali where the entire astrology is actually written. Stars, they named stars, and they still have archives. One of the oldest calendars we find on the face of the earth is actually found in the land of Mali, where the griots would be passing information from one generation to the other, being able to trace their history, not only 3, 5, 6 generations, but some of these tribes even up to 50 to 60 generations of their own histories. All this information kept by oral tradition. That's why I always say on many of my shows, if not all of them, that Africa needs to learn how do we harvest our indigenous knowledge. How do we harvest this indigenous knowledge and convert it into technologies? This means, therefore, we need to look into our medicines and collect this indigenous knowledge, convert it from its primitive, quote-unquote, primitive status, package it nicely, name it nicely, find intellectual properties around it, then put it there for the world to benefit from, so that we can also begin to enjoy the profits of our own indigenous knowledge. We need to find our indigenous knowledge in terms of our architecture, in terms of our buildings. I know many of us right now are living in square houses, houses that are made out of bricks and mortar with carpets on the floor. You go back to our African houses that are made out of clay with cow dung on the floor, round houses, thatched with grass and with wood. And you look into these houses and they look primitive. But are you aware that these houses are actually scientifically proven to be healthier than these square rooms that we are living in terms of acoustics and voices? The houses that are round carry the voices much better. And again, in terms of warmth, when you put the fire at the center of the house, the entire house, when the house is round, is able to actually have, and again, not only in terms of warmth, but round houses speak of our worldview, that we look at how things, how life is all connected. Round houses have a spiritual and a psychological connection that connects us, that we are all connected together and no one sits behind another person, but we all become the central part of the home. So we go back to these technologies, even in terms of our modern designs. Go back to your own indigenous African construction materials and look at how our old people used to make houses. Take this technology, move into your laboratories, begin to build houses that look like that. Why am I saying that? Because these houses that are African, they are cool in summer and they are also warm in winter. And not only that, these houses are organically beautiful. What am I saying? Every 3 to 5 to 6 years, you must be again rebuilding these houses or re-establishing them or re-putting the thatched roofs and etc. Sometimes 10 to 15 years. My grandmother's hut stood there for as long as I remember, for more than 20, 15 years. And once in a while we'll be getting grass to re-thatch them. What am I talking about? It might look like it's a lot of work, but organically this is right, because therefore you don't have lots of dead material that the world and the soil cannot recycle. When you decide to move away from your house and build another new homestead, grass then decomposes. The sticks and the logs that you use for building the houses are eaten by the grass, and the whole house drops to the ground. And the ground is allowed to resuscitate itself again and become a habitable place. Rather than these houses that we are now living in, that have cement, that have metals, that have plastics around them. Even at the moment when you have left the house still stands there, causing lots of destruction in terms of our vegetation and in terms of our nature. So it's not all that is primitive, that is uncivilized. Hear me well? It's not all that is primitive, that is uncivilized. Some of the things that we call uncivilized are actually the most civilized of them all. Medicines that we eat from the ground, our bodies can digest them because they are organic. The houses that we build, they can be decomposed because they are organic. Unlike the plastics that we're using, unlike these carbon things that we're using, that take much more time to decompose and go back into the ground, African technologies are environmentally friendly. I therefore put a paper some time ago entitled the 7IR, 7 Industrial Revolution. What do I mean in that paper? It is that what we used to have, which is organic, that's what the world is now looking for. And in the 7th Industrial Revolution, it is a revolution where you own nothing, you make nothing, but you own everything. Therefore, my definition of civilization is when humanity is able to live in harmony with nature. When a human being and nature are in harmony, then that is civilization. Where the forests become our pharmaceutical companies, where the forests become our industries, where animals are living in peace, where our waters are clean, where the air we breathe, it is clean. Civilizations, therefore, it is not technology. Civilization is the preservation of our habitat as African people. Therefore, when you look into our history, we want to go back to our history and pick up those things that are important in terms of us carrying them forward into our civilization. Someone might think that these clothes are actually healthy. And again, you begin to study and find that many of these clothes that we're putting on, some of them have been made out of plastic and polythene and etc. And by the time we are sweating, Our bodies are absorbing all these foreign things into our bodies. In some certain cases, even the bras that our women are putting, some of them are filled in with silicone, and some of this silicone filters into the body, causing unnecessary diseases. And in the olden days, again, our aunties would be putting on these facial creams to lighten up the skins. And some of these facial creams had mercury in them, like Ambi, for example. It burned our sisters' cheeks. And this Ambi again ends up causing lots of skin diseases and skin problems. The list is endless. What are the impacts? What are the impacts of the fluoride that we are using for brushing our teeth? What are the impacts of the preservatives that are put in our food? What are the impacts of the carbon monoxide and the carbon dioxides that are coming out from the cars that we are driving? What are the impacts of the carpets that are on our floors that are full of bacteria and germs? Is a carpeted house better than a traditional clay floor? These are things that our modern generation needs to start looking at. And the other day, I almost giggled myself to death when you find young people saying, now we have technologies, we can now speak to people very far. In the olden days, people would put their water in a dish and look into a dish and speak to someone hundreds of kilometers away, and they'll be talking to them in pure water. There was a technology right there which they would use to speaking to each other. Not only that, we know in terms of our traditional stuff, some people can actually make rain and strike you with lightning. Technology right there. Why can't we find these technologies and capture this energy into generators, into storerooms, and we can be able to create enough electricity for ourselves? I'm not saying let's go back to witchcraft, but remember, everything that you call witchcraft, it is witchcraft until it has been put into the science lab, beneficiated, improved, and we capture this science and bring it into our modern space. The issue of flying at night is not new. Our grandparents have been flying for the longest of time. Imagine now during the times of Corona, if we had this technology with us, we would be flying every night and flying and coming back to where we are. The question is, how does the African look back into her own technology and harvest this technology, harvest this intelligence, harvest this knowledge systems, and put it together into our space of existence. This speaks to our food. When we come back on top of the program, again, we shall be having a follow-up conversation. How did Africa use to govern itself? I thought I would take this moment and just galvanize and consolidate most of the information that many of my guests have been giving you on the program. Your host is Maponga J. Your show is Sankofa. We'll be back right after the break as we explore methods of governance in the ancient African times. I'll be back after the break.
Join me, Mpumalanga, on Inside Out on Galaxy. This is a show that helps individuals on how to deal with serious matters from the inside out. This is to help remedy the effects that depression seems to have in our homes, relationships, individuals, and even our communities at large. We will look at some of the devastating effects that depression has on media personalities, prominent people, and our own brothers and sisters. Some of our loved celebrities and musicians having had to go through depression and fought a losing battle. How can this be prevented and minimized? And what causes this? From the inside out.
Hello. Being a legal practitioner in South Africa in these challenging times demands lawyers that will help clients beyond legal issues. The ever-changing demands in commerce and tourism require lawyers who have sound and clear business and commercial knowledge, and that's where MB Chavangu Incorporated comes in. Our business, mining, tourism, health, labor, and economic knowledge encapsulated with law and litigation experience gives us an advantage in the legal sphere. Our experience in assisting businesses, government, and various industries with their needs puts us amongst the many progressive and striving law firms in South Africa. Now, to contact our attorneys for assistance with any of the mentioned fields and others, please call us on 012-341-4 4187 or send us an email on admin@chabangu.co.za. MB Chabangu Incorporated, where problems meet solutions.
God is so amazing.
Feel the heat.
The Bible says that through his death on the cross, we are now reconciled with our Father.
Forgive and you shall be forgiven.
So wherever God takes us, we're just excited about it.
As a child of God, where you are, you must have an hour of prayer.
Feel the excitement.
In the name of Jesus, in the name of Jesus.
I believe that God is working right now.
Feel the heat with StarSat.
Welcome back, welcome back. When one of the critical issues again that we need to have a look at for this morning, it is the issue of governance, African governance systems. And when we talk governance, we need to start challenging the whole status quo that our democratic governments have given us. Apparently, under a democratic system, we are supposed to have a better life. As if Africans did not have or know how to govern themselves. All these kingdoms that I'm mentioning, the kingdoms of Ghana, the kingdoms of Tanzania, Congo, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, Ethiopia, right up into the kingdoms of Embo at the lower south here. They had a way in which they governed themselves, had a way in which they managed themselves. And there was a great law that lived in our hearts as African people as to how do we carry justice and how do we manage ourselves as kingdoms. They already had a method through which they could be able to execute judgment one to another, not undermining and not overlooking some of the cruel kings that could have been born who had lots of appetite for blood and killing people recklessly to prove power. But under the normal kingdoms, under the good kings that you find in the kingdoms, they actually had a process of managing themselves. When you look into the great Zimbabwe kingdom, actually, what attracted colonialism was not much except our industry. Take note, our industry. Zimbabwe was already doing trade with the Phoenicians. Read in your history, with the Chinese. We're doing trade with the European countries way before the arrival here of Van Riebeck in the 18 and 1600s. And because of our technologies of mining, the sciences that we used for digging our minerals. And by the way, we have lost some of these sciences. But when you look into my totem, for example, the Shona Mukanya Soswe Vuzijena, there's a small little line inside there where they say, Vacheriwe Mangura Nabapfurivayo. That word Vacheriwe Mangura means those that were digging iron ore and they were forging weapons and instruments with iron ore. Therefore, the Europeans did not come here and teach us how to make spears or teach us how to make knives. We already were making these things before the arrival of the colonialists. It means, therefore, that the African, for you, when you are looking at an African artifact, like a sword and a spear, and then they tell you, oh, this spear is so many thousands and thousands of years old. To a light-minded person, it is just an artifact. That is a spear or it's a sword. Or they show you some beads. Or they show you some clay pots. Or they show you something. When you look into these things, don't become naive. This is a library of information. Because when you are holding a spear that is thousands of years old, what you are holding is not just a spear. You are holding an industry. That spear tells you there is someone who made this spear. That's more primitive. Secondly, they only did not make this spear. They actually were able to go and dig the mineral. That's number two. Therefore, on the digging of the mineral, you begin to start investigating what technology did they use to dig this mineral. Just when you think you understand it, it is not just a spear, but this spear is actually purified iron. So they needed another technology or a science of separating the ferruses and separating the trace elements that are found in this metal. So you already begin to deal with science. And when you talk that science, the question is, what chemicals were they using for separating these minerals? Be it iron ore, be it brass, when they were making actually all these beautiful traditional bracelets that we are putting on. This is not Western civilization. This is indigenous knowledge, where our forefathers would go to the mountains, dig up minerals, and they could separate between gold and silver and iron ore and tin and brass. What am I talking about? Because when you get back in our languages, we are not going to be told that gold was introduced by Europeans. We have a name of gold in my Shona tribe, Ndarama, Ndarama, meaning before you brought your civilization, we already knew what gold was. We have a name called Mangura, Mangura, meaning to say we knew what iron ore is. You get into Zimbabwe right now, there's a whole place that they called Mangura, Mangura mines. And Mangura means metal, means iron. Therefore, when you look into the African artifacts, they are actually an exhibition that by the time the African is making a bracelet and is able to combine gold and brass and combine it with iron and silver and make all these artifacts, it speaks to the greater wealth of the African people that we actually had names. Not only names, we had the technology. Not only technology, we also had the science of digging these minerals. I don't know how they were doing it, but they would dig it up. They will purify it. My grandfather, by the time I was born, I was fortunate. He had something, you call it a furnace in your English language, but my grandfather used to call it mvuto, mvuto. Mvuto, he had this skin of a goat that he would have, and then I would be asked to be pumping that skin of goat. It had a pipe on top that would be attracting the air, trapping the air into this skin, and when it gets into this skin, it cannot escape backwards, but then the air would be pushed through a pipe that was blowing into this fireplace, which had coals of fire on it. There he would put his metals. He would put his metals, and he would start forging his axes, his plowing hoes, and making other weapons, his knives and other things from a traditional furnace, which we called mvuto. Then the question is, who taught our forefathers how to make these mvutos for making weapons and for forging instruments and for forging jewelries and cutleries that we were using, for forging spears and swords? It means therefore that we actually had the science of doing that. And from that technology, then it informed the military section. Because when you make your own swords and you make your own spears and you make your own knives, then that informed the quality of weapons that you would have, therefore, for creating your army. And the army then would be found within the royal palaces for fighting, for defending, for hunting, and for protecting ourselves from various elements that were there. Therefore, African science and African technology is critical for the modern child to visit this technology and study it intently so that you can be able to extrapolate from it critical knowledge that informs your present day. By the time we are taking metals and ions to be making cars, to be making our other elements, it is not the first time we are meeting this technology, but the technology has been with us. I mean, who can doubt the African hospital? The African hospital, where the old people already knew that when you combine this root with that leaf and this leaf and put so many drops of water, you come up with such a concoction. And when it is such a concoction, you actually are able to come up either with medicine, or you're coming up with paint, or you're coming up with anything else. And you look back in our own traditions, you find that all our things were designed in beautiful colors. The Ndebele cultures, for example, the Zulu cultures, for example, the Shona cultures, for example, the Kikuyu cultures, the Maasai cultures, all these beautiful, intricate, please take note, intricate technologies of combining these things in beautiful symmetry into embroideries, a tapestry of art. We cannot miss this and call this uncivilized people. We are highly civilized. If there is anything I can accomplish today, it is to convince you as Africans that be it botany, we knew something about it. Be it pharmacology, we knew something about it. Be it mining, we knew something about it. Be it art, we knew something about it. I mean, even look at childbirth. We all knew how to do it. But as I said, I would talk about governance. I want to end up there. and tell you that when it comes to African governance systems, we had the king in place, and the king did not work alone. The king worked with seers, because he was a seer also himself. He would work with seers, he would work with prophets, and not only prophets is actually a new word, but the correct name is a seer. And together with these were traditional healers, and these healers would therefore work in terms of strengthening the kingdom. So the hospital was there, the projection department was there, the military department was there, and when a crime was committed in the community, then the seer, the king himself, would gather his people around. He would not make a decision all by himself, but all the elders of the community would come together. In South Africa, they call it likhotla. In my tribe in Zimbabwe, they call it dare. Dare. That's where you call all the elders of the community to come together. Then the person who has been wronged will come to the dare. You come there maybe with a goat, you come there maybe with a sheep, whatever you're bringing with, and this is the meat that the elders will be eating while they're discussing your story. And then you have a conversation, your story is put into the center, and people then begin to have a contribution. All the people around the circle would contribute and pass their information as to how best they thought that this issue must be dealt with. Therefore, you find that in the midst of that, the king is listening. The queens are also in the background listening and collecting all the information. The king had the right of either dismissing the tribal sitting and withdraw to himself with a few people, consolidate the information that had been discussed, and come back to the greater group, and then they will begin to discuss until a solution was found. Then the person who has wronged someone else will then be charged. Will be charged with whatever they were being charged with, and then they were supposed to pay that. And the soldiers of the king or the watchers of the king would then escort this person to their village, go and collect the cows or the goats or whatever must be collected, and retribution and payments were given. That was justice in the old times. In the event that you had killed a person, boom, you have killed a person. It will not just end with you having killed a person, but then the other tribe begins to prepare to come and fight with you if the person was from across the river. Then what would happen is that the tribe that has wronged the other tribe would then come together and agree what to do. A head of cattle will be found, and in many cases a young child, maybe a baby girl, would be found, or a baby boy would be found, depending what the tribe would agree upon, and then drive this head of cattle to the homestead or to the house of the king or the palace of the king where the wrong had been done. And these gifts will be given. And yes, in my tribes, even a human being will be given as a gift to that tribe. And take note, this child many times will not be the child from the very home of the person who has conducted or committed the crime. It will be from any one of the other families that are around. Now take note, after this crime has been paid and the gifts have been accepted, you who has wronged the other person, we did not have a prison. But in the fact now that you understand that through your crime, another family has lost a child to pay for your crime, what quality of life would you live as a criminal yourself? You would discover that you would become the most responsible citizen, because you knew that if someone else would commit a crime, they would be coming for your child also. This is what it means, therefore, when we say we looked after each other. And a crime and injury to one was an injury to all, and a payment for one was a payment for all. Justice, therefore, was given in that the whole community took responsibility over the crime of one person. By so doing, every community member was accountable to the other community member. I was lucky to be brought up in the 60s. When your cows eat from your neighbor's field, the father of that field will not even chase you, no matter how old he was. You would come to him and report that I have been negligent. And many times we'll be playing soccer and playing on the sides of the river, and the cattle would go and eat other people's fields. We would need to go to those homes and apologize and tell them and look the crime in the eyes and say, we were negligent. Our cows ate your field. If the old man was angry, He would tell you to lie down on the ground, and they would beat the hell out of us. And then you take your cattle and you go. And in some certain cases, he would drive your cattle from his field to your grandfather and then submit those cattle. And then you know, by the time you are harvesting your fields, some of the harvest from your field would be taken to the house and the family of which had suffered the loss through your negligence. In such a case, therefore, you were able to balance, so that through your act of negligence, you were able also to pay back, account for, and show some support for the family that had suffered loss. This is how we were accountable to each other. Therefore, it took a village to bring up a child, because every old woman in that village was my mother. Every old grandmother in that village was my grandmother. Every old man in that village was my grandfather. And so was every brother in that village my brother. We grew up together as a community, so that we were responsible one to another. We protected one another. We were accountable one to another. When you see my goats, when you see my donkeys, when you see my cattle 5-10 kilometers away from yourself, you would not steal those things. You would drive them back to the rightful owner without a problem. I miss those days, the days of old, when strangers would walk us back to our mothers' homes in the night and not be afraid, where girls would walk up in the bush all by themselves and not fear for anything, where young girls would go to the river and fetch water and come back home safely with no problem. This is what they call primitive, when we were all safe. What they now call civilization is people walking with guns, with knives, shooting and poking each other, killing each other, taking away from each other, because no one is responsible to no one. It's me, myself, and I. The governance systems of the past told you, you don't live for yourself, you live for others, you live for your family. This is Ubuntu. This is Ubuntu. The eyes of the entire community would be watching you as a young child who is growing up, to make sure that we grew up in the right way. And governance was rooted in the home. From the home, it moved into the community, and from the community into the nation. Therefore, you would find that in the olden days, the fathers had their chairs. Yes, you heard me well. The father had his chair, where he would sit in that chair, and no child would sit on that chair. And when he wanted to have order in his home, then he would call his family together and sit on his chair and execute judgment and execute justice in his own home. It is from this chair that people were being taught respect. You don't talk to each other while you are standing. You sit down. You sit down, and then you talk to each other. You know what I'm saying? This is respect. The father is on his chair. You sit down there. And many of us are in trouble with our modern wives and husbands, because we talk to them while we are standing. Hey, when it's like this, you are like this, you are stupid, you are what. Before we notice it, people are quarreling and scratching and fighting each other. Try this method next time. When you have a disagreement with someone, find a chair and sit down. Call the other person whom you are disagreeing with. They must also sit down and talk to each other. Find each other. It's in the midst of a good conversation and good communication that relationships can be mended. In the backdrop of that, then you find proverbs coming into the African conversation. That which you have messed up through speech, you must fix it through speech. Already we are learning that conversation is the code to all communication. But as far as governance is concerned, there's no ruler who ruled the kingdom alone. You would always rule your kingdom together with the advice of your wise men, together with the advice of the queens, the advices of the princes, the advices of the headsmen, the advices of the heads of their own homes. These people came together to formulate a government. And I wish that when I'm talking about indigenous governance systems, these are the things that we are talking about. That instead of us voting politicians into power, we needed a community consultation where every community must be represented, not represented by politicians, but represented by the community leaders themselves. Families must be represented, tribes must be represented, cultures must be represented, and in the midst of the collective, the governments of the day must learn to take cues, not from foreign bodies and external bodies, but take cues from the indigenous people. The local people must be given the right to determine, to discuss, to converse their own politics, their own economics. Right now, our governments just wake up in the morning, they go and sign treaties with foreign countries, selling our countries to foreigners for millions of dollars, not for the benefit of the local people, but for the benefit of the politicians themselves, who open up accounts in foreign countries and they begin to enjoy the wealth of their own countries with foreign people that we don't even know. This is not governance. This is thuggery. This is theft. Our governments are actually a crime scene because they are not leading, they are not guiding, they are not protecting the people. They are protecting their own interests. What am I talking about? Traditional and indigenous governance systems places land in the hands of the people, places resources in the hands of the people, places destiny in the hands of the people, and the communities must be allowed to determine their own future. And by the way, not all future must become technological. Not all future must become industries. Not all future must become plastic. If a community decides to remain primitive, understand me please, primitive. If the bushman, the Khoisan, decides to remain as a Khoisan, you don't need to force him to put on a jacket and a tie and a pair of shoes and force him to build a house. If he wants to live as a nomad, the first rule of human respect says every human being must be allowed to be themselves. Yes, so the Zulu must be allowed to remain as Zulu. The Shona must be allowed to remain as Shona. And this whole modern laughter and sarcasm we find in education, where those who have gone to Oxford and Manchester University come back to us and they shout to those that have not gone to university and mock them that they are not educated. It is not right. Humanity must allow every human being to express themselves, to live with themselves, to enjoy the basic fruit of their civilization to the best way that they know how. Those who want to deliver their children indigenously must be allowed to deliver their children behind their own doors in their own homes. Those who want to be treated by indigenous fruits and indigenous herbs must be allowed to use their own herbs to treat themselves. Those who are refusing to become civilized, quote unquote civilized, must be allowed to become uncivilized. This whole thing of civilization is destroying the world altogether. You find that civilization is moving into the forests of Congo, moving into the forests of the Amazon, moving into indigenous lands, cutting down trees, putting down buildings and putting down factories that don't benefit those environments, but instead these civilizations are destroying our vegetation, destroying our habitat, polluting our water, contaminating our trees, contaminating our air, and in the name of civilization, we are converting this world into a concrete jungle. Civilization is not plastic. Civilization must be organic. For that reason, therefore, our governance must speak to our indigenous governance. Our medicine must speak to our indigenous medicine. Our fashion must speak to our indigenous fashion. Some people were laughing the other day, hey, these Africans are uncivilized, they put on skins. Hey, don't be so excited. Actually, skins are healthier than plastic foods, than plastic clothes, because skins are organic. Your body can speak to the skin, on your skin. But plastic on your body is cancerous. Plastic on your bra is cancerous. Hey, so-and-so is uncivilized, does not have a bra. The one without a bra is actually more civilized than the one with a bra. Hey, these Africans don't have pads. Do you know what is in these pads? All these chemicals that they put into our women's anatomy and biology is affected by these things. Hey, Africans are uncivilized because they don't have contraception. Do you know the side effects of contraception? So in the midst of the African being excited about modern technologies, we must never forget that some of these technologies have huge side effects. Huge side effects. While they're treating one thing, they're destroying 10 other things. While they're building one building, they're destroying many other things. While they're saying we are going to be giving you progress, we're bringing development, some of these developments are not developments at all. It is a recipe for poverty. And by the time you know it, what we thought was democracy has actually become democracy. For democracy as we have it now, it's us electing a few people who become bullies, who become thieves to rob the system, instead of them consulting with the communities at large. Has Africa become a better place, or we are deteriorating? Is civilization making us civilized, or civilization is making us uncivilized? Now that we are civilized, question, what quality of food are we eating? Now that we are civilized, question, what type of air are we breathing? Now that we are civilized, question, what type of contraceptions are we using? Now that we are civilized, question, what type of governments are we having? Now that we are civilized, question, what type of morals are we having? Now that we are civilized, question, have we become better people? What quality of marriages do we have? What quality of children are we producing? Maybe it's high time Africa stops to look back into the past and see where we are. We could begin to have an idea as to where are we going as a continent. Not everything that is civilized is actually civilized. Sankofa, we look back where we are coming from to establish where we are and rewrite our narrative as the African people. Are we becoming better people? We'll be back with you right after the break, and we explore the various aspects of this Sankofa idea. Don't go away.
A revolutionary struggle veteran has fallen at the age of 95. We mourn the demise of one of the 8 Livonian trialists who stood in the dock in the Palace of Justice in Pretoria while awaiting their sentence on sabotage charges. This monumental event took place on the 12th of June in 1964, and it is considered to be the most significant political trial in the South African history. Mlangeni was one of the key defendants who ended up being detained in solitary confinement for 2 decades in Robben Island. Today, we celebrate his journey as an astute struggle hero and the last remaining Rivonia trialists. Sithi hamba kahle Mkhonto. Welcome back again to your show here on Sankofa.
where we are exploring the greater African knowledge systems, harvesting our indigenous knowledge systems. And as we come back now, I want to focus at one critical element in terms, again, we will be exploring these 7 pillars of AIM together with you. That speaks to governance, that speaks to education, that speaks to agriculture and technology, that speaks to culture, that speaks to religion, and all the other 7. But today I just thought maybe let me punch some few holes in our conversation so that we can actually begin to develop a much more sustainable conversation. And while we are on it, there's one element again that I want us to delve into, that is the element of education. It's fine, you can bring my water. You can bring my water. The element of education. Education becomes critical because education in the ancient times happened not only in a formal structure, it also happened in the informal structure. Our education was both formal and informal. And someone might say, oh, well, you don't know what you're talking about. Just wait a minute, let me explain it. If you are talking about formal education as of writing, it's another story. But if you are talking about formal education in terms of having an institution where you are teaching any type of knowledge, then to me that was a classroom. Our young girls would go to school to be taught how to become women. Our young boys would be taken to school to be taught how to become men. Therefore, you would sit down with them and teach them. Though the education was happening in an oral space, but it was happening practically. The difference we had with our education is that our education was not only a bookish education, it was a practical education where you would hold and do and work while you are holding things. What am I talking about? My grandfather would take me to the field, not only show me how to plow, he would show me how to yoke oxen. And when the oxen have turned upside down, some of these words I don't know how to call them in English. In other words, the yoke is now on the back and whatever. You'll be taught the science of how to undo an oxen on its plow. Would be taught how to lower the plow and how to lift it and how to throw it back into and how to create nice lines. These sciences, for me, we cannot call that informal education. For me, this was the highest form of education because it was practical, it was real. We were taught how to make blankets using skins. After you kill an ox, then you must take the skin and roll it up in the mud, go and soak it up by the side of the river for some few days. You come back, then after that, you roll it up on a tree. Then you can make some whips and other types of ropes. Then if you want to make it into a blanket, how do you remove the extra fat on the skin? And you rub it and you rub it, and then you go and collect some oil from your cows, the fat from the milk, the cream from the milk, you smear it on the skin, then you rub the skin until the skin becomes soft that it could be used as a blanket or as a mat. These, for me, are great sciences. And therefore, the African knowledge system was not just happening. I hate it. I hate it when people say this was informal education, because you want to sound like the European education is the formal and the more educated. How educated are you when you can't even feed yourself? How educated are you when you can't even clothe yourself? How educated are you when you can't even heal yourself or treat yourself? Right now you get cut in the bush, you don't even know how to fix your own leg, and then you say you're educated. How educated are you? You can't even swim. You can't even handle. You can't even see the weather that is changing and the rain is coming unless the TV and the radio tells you that there is a storm that is coming. You don't know, but our old people knew how to pick up some dust and throw it into the air and see where the dust is going and be able to predict whether this year we'll have a good harvest or this year it will be a bad year. How did they know? By seeing certain birds flying around. They knew that this year we're going to have a harvest. By seeing certain insects, they knew this year we might have a certain disease. For me, this knowledge cannot be called informal knowledge. Let's just call it education. Let us not allow Africans to be classified by Europeans. I've had a few feedbacks and a few side kicks from some people who want to challenge and fight with what I'm saying. And say Maponga J is anti-white. Maponga J does not like white people. He does not like Europeans. Wait a minute. I'm not here to be discussing issues of love and hatred. When an African begins to talk about himself, then it is classified as hatred. It's not hatred. It is self-realization. We are here to teach the African people who they are. We cannot wait to be taught by the Europeans who we are. Our education was holistic. How did it used to happen? Our TV, I remember this party, and our TV was the fireplace. Then we would sit around the fireplace in the evening, and grandmothers would be telling us to sit down nicely while we are roasting our mealies on the sides of the fire there, and she would begin to tell us ngano, these old ancient stories, these old folklore stories, how the baboon and the rabbit would play together, and how the rabbit ended up cooking the baboon, and he made his music instrument from the ribs of the baboon, and etc. And you look into these stories and they look useless, but if you look very carefully, is this not the truth? That through the cunning knowledge of westernization, actually we have become the baboons as Africans. We have been cooked in the pots, and through our bones, the Europeans have made their own instruments out of their own out of our own bones. The question is, what are we doing with some of these knowledge systems? Right now, our children are being taught by TVs, they are being taught by radios, they are being taught by books, and all these books have nothing good to say about the Africans, except that the Africans are primitive. The only time you see the Africans in these movies is when Africans are piercing each other, poking each other, and they're killing each other, practicing witchcraft and everything. That is evil. Africa is not all about witchcraft. Africa is not all about nakedness. Africa is not all about just poverty. Africa is a world of knowledge, of science, and of technology. Our dances, our poetry, our art, the celebration of life itself in its highest form. Our dances were our distressing centers, where high blood pressure, and sugar diabetes, and arthritis were being treated during the dances, because it is here we increased our circulation. And we danced until we sweated, and it was not about sound, it was not only about rhythm, it was about cohesion, the family community coming together and celebrating life in its purest form. Education happened while we were plowing, we were learning. Education happened while we were making our skins, we were learning. While we were blowing our metals, we were learning. While we were walking, we were learning. While we were cutting trees, we were learning. While we were cutting grass, we were learning. While we were harvesting mushrooms on the sides of the mountains, on the sides of the trees, we were learning. While we were cutting up our meat, we were learning what is bile, what is liver, what is this, who eats this, who does not eat this. Don't give this to the young girls. Don't give this to the young boys. And you look around today in your modern English and you think this was oppression. Why would you be denying children an opportunity to be eating liver, and denying children to be eating testicles of a bull, and etc.? Our forefathers knew what type of foods young boys and girls must eat. Young boys and girls were not supposed to eat eggs. Oh, they are oppressing them. They will mature prematurely. Right now, our kids are eating 4, 5, 6, 10 eggs a week. By the time they're 8 years old, they're already on their menstrual periods. Our young boys, by the time they're 7, 8 years old, they're already having night dreams. They're already mad. Not because they're mature, but because the diet which we are giving them has fast-tracked them and moved them from being simple children and adolescents. Now they have to start dealing with issues of maturity, worrying about pads and periods at the age of 9 years old and 10 years old, which it was not like so. So while we were cutting our animals, we were learning. While we were making our huts, we were learning. While we were thatching our roofs, we were learning. Not only how to thatch a roof, but how to connect things, how the things that are in the ground must connect together. What is the role of the family? How do we all come together to make up a family? Who covers this family? What is at the top of the family? How do we line up the kitchen? What goes to the front? What goes to the fireplace? Who sits on the left of the kitchen? Who sits on the right place of the kitchen? What sort of weapons do you put? How high must the door be? What the position? Like in the Zulu tribes, when you enter a house, you don't enter a house upright. You must crawl when you're entering a house Oh, that is so torturous. Shut up if you don't understand African tradition. You have to crawl into the hut, because when you're entering a hut, you must be in a position of humility. So that if you are an enemy, I must be able to kill you when you are still at the door. So even the door itself was not a place of entrance. It was a place of safety. That's why all those huts, you find that the door is quite low. And when you enter into that house, you enter in a posture of spirituality, in a posture of worship, in a posture of kneeling down. Whereas me, who is inside the house, I'm standing full stretch with a spear in my hand. If you are an enemy, I'll kill you at the door. So when you look into these sciences, let's stop ridiculing ourselves as Africans and mocking ourselves and laughing at ourselves as Africans. And we look at our history and we give it all sorts of names. This is primitive. This is uneducated. This is uncivilized. This is so backwards. This is what? Because you think by holding a small little cell phone in your hand, you are educated. Many of us have information in our hands, but we've actually become so stupid and so dull, it's not funny. By throwing away your history, you are throwing away your knowledge, your intelligence. Education happened every day. From folklore stories, be told those are the stars, we're being taught the names of the stars, we're being taught the seasons of the year, and even the names. I remember some of those star names, that is in Mandebele, stuff there, the Milk White Way. You're being told again, wherever the star that comes up in the morning, wherever Yehuda here, that early morning star. So our African languages, what is beautiful is that if you doubt that we were educated, go back into language. You will find that we actually had names for the members of the body. We know exactly what each member represented and how each part of the body worked. That's serious anatomy. Serious anatomy. And remember, my grandmother had this other herb that she used to use. They used to call it chiroba dunguru. They would take this small little herb and squash it and mix it with other things. Then few men would hold you down and press you to the ground. And then they drop a few drops of that thing into your nostrils. You'd actually lose your mind. You would go mad, like mad. But then people will have to hold you down for some few minutes, and this thing will get into your nostrils and burst your veins that are connected not to anything else but to your teeth, to such an extent that you can still eat dry mealies with your teeth. Though they are rotten, you would pull up a tooth and put it on the ground, because the nerve endings that lead to the sensitivity of the teeth were treated. Now this is serious technology for us. I grew up chewing mushangura. Mushangura is this small little bush that you would chew. It would paint our lips orange, and our tongues also. Would use it for brushing up our teeth. And only now, with my uncle, who is a pharmacologist at the University of Zimbabwe, Dr. Charles Maponga, now confirms with me that this mushangura is actually a good herb which can cure gingivitis for the teeth. It also cleans up the teeth in terms of a toothpaste. It also clears halitosis and does many of the oral hygiene around the mouth and the ears and the mouth and etc. And this, we used to chew it when we were heading cattle. We used to chew it with brushing up our teeth. And now instead of us using our Colgates and close-ups for brushing up our teeth, we have an indigenous herb. This is where I thought that the educated people would meet me halfway, when I could give them an indigenous solution. And then what they do is to take this indigenous solution, take it to the laboratory and work around it. And then let us come up actually and have our own indigenous toothpaste. I was so shocked the other day to Google on internet. You can Google it even right now. The organic toothpaste and the organic toothbrush. I saw it being sold in the UK for £35. A piece of stick that you can find in the bush. But because we've gone to school and we're educated, we don't believe we can brush our teeth with a stick. You must brush your teeth with a plastic toothbrush, with plastic fluoride. Google the impacts of fluoride and chlorine on the minds. That's why you are dull and stupid. It benumbs the mind. It slows down your thinking. And these researches are all out there. But in the midst of education, you are taught only to look at certain type of information and not consolidate and consider other forms of education. Therefore, our education included our food, our education, our anatomy, I can even go to town. I was born behind a hut, by the way. I was not born in a hospital. My mother did not go through epidurals and all these vaccinations you're talking about in town. I was born behind my grandmother's kitchen. My placenta and my umbilical cord was cut and was dug on the ground. That's my title deed to the land of Africa. My umbilical cord is in the ground. And when I dance, I join my own spirit that is lying in the ground. My deposit is there, that I came from there, and I'm coming back there. And from there, then the placentas were taken. Whatever was done to them was done to them. Our old women, by the time they're delivering, and the herbs were used around them. Education. I remember my grandmother sending me to the bush to go and cut some barks of some certain trees, and I would bring these barks. They would put them in a big dish of water, and the young ladies who had delivered, my aunties, would be sitting in these dishes so that they could realign their birth canals and sanitize and sterilize the birth places and stuff like that, and restore these women to full health. If you doubt what I'm saying, Google around. We did not start doing brain surgery when the white people came here. Our African people used to do brain surgery. We using the correct anesthesia, by the way. They would carry some bush and etc. They drag you. After they drag you, they sharpen up a chisel, put it into the fire to sterilize it, and chip off your head, open up your skull, work in whatever they wanted to work on the inside, and put your skull back together again. This technology is not new. Our forefathers knew how to conduct a brain surgery. Now, because you've gone to school, you were told that you are primitive, and you believed these colonial lies. No wonder our lives are what they are. No tree is stronger than its roots. We want to tell you these things so that you can begin to appreciate your history. You can appreciate your past. Embrace it. Love it. Go back there. There's still some technology that you can find from there, which you can convert into business. And we can change our worldview by re-establishing the authenticity of our history and building these bridges of knowledge that are almost being lost from day to day. By the time our generation is gone and we go with this, I'm sorry to say, some of this information will have been lost forever. It is important, therefore, that while we are still alive, some of us who are still alive, who happen to be privileged enough to have lived on two sides of the coin, in the indigenous, rural, primitive side, we have also moved to the colonial, civilized side. When we bring these two knowledge systems together, we want the modern generation to collect as much information from us and package it and move this information into the future. For our history contains science, contains geography, contains pharmacology, contains biology, contains history, contains physics, contains chemistry, contains anthropology, contains cosmology. It contains everything else that we think that the Western world is teaching us. Nothing is new under the sun. Nothing is new under the sun. Right here in Mpumalanga, we have one of the oldest watches ever made in terms of civilization, the clock of humankind. Powerful piece of history that we cannot even begin to talk about. What do we do about that? The cradle of humankind, right here on the south side. Powerful history. What are we doing with it? Genius and intelligence, therefore. In terms of the modern African, it is how do we go back to the past, collect this information, package it correctly, IP it, place it on the world market. Then we can compete effectively with the rest of the world. I want to salute the Chinese for what they have done, looking into their indigenous medicines, looking into their indigenous knowledge systems. There are these beautiful vases. I see them in American museums. I see them in European palaces. These Chinese vases, they will cost you millions. Some of them are priceless. Then you say, so what? They were able to go back into their history, collect these technologies, make these beautiful vases, even Chinaware, these transparent plates and what. Seriously, their art form. And all this together with their medicine has been aligned into mainstream medicine, into mainstream technology, into mainstream civilization. It is high time, therefore, that Africa must also begin to look into its own history, go back into our own archives, learn from our own forefathers, collect our indigenous knowledge, take it to universities if you please, package this information, fine-tune it, IP it, and let us market it to the world. Then we can also say, as Africans, we, over and above what civilization is telling us, we have contributed this. There's nothing that stops us from making skin blankets. I got so angry the other day when I saw in Paris, in France, them celebrating Lesotho culture. Those blankets, selling them 1,000, 2,000 euro dollars per piece. They come here, take our technology, move it into Paris, and make it into fashion. And when it is coming back to us, it is costing thousands of dollars. And we are watching as Africans. The other day I got so angry when I saw some Girwa guy in America claiming that he made mbira, a Zimbabwean traditional instrument, an African traditional instrument. And you take our instruments and you walk up to America and then you pattern it yourself and say, I established it. And because there's no one else in history who has claimed to own it, now it's me who created it. But this is our technology. This is our technology. You look at all this stuff we're putting on, this is high quality indigenous, cultural, historical knowledge. The question is, how do we package our knowledge so that it can become profitable to us? Take note, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't study about yourself, other people will teach you about yourself. The best form of knowledge is you learning much about yourself, looking backwards into the future. Your program is Sankofa. We're visiting the paths, the ways of the ancient times, going back to the crossroads of ancient times, finding history from there, finding our compass from there, finding our medicines from there, rewriting our narrative as the greater African people. What is it that we can do in the 21st century? And how are we going to do it? And how can we improve our indigenous knowledge and make it marketable? So we need skin blankets, yes. We need skin fashion, yes. We need indigenous medicines, yes. I'm still looking forward, by the way. I think I'll do it before I die. I want to build a modern city with indigenous knowledge, with stones, with sticks, and with grass, and just allow people to re-experience the past which we are running away from. For what good is money and what good is technology if you spend all your wealth to fix the health that you'll have messed up through technology? Until we come back again after the break, we'll be right back as we explore our great African culture. Your program Sankofa, your host Maponga J. Don't go away. We'll be back right after the break.
The coronavirus outbreak.
Experience the extraordinary.
Tremendous waste and tremendous fraud. Mexico is, in fact, you will soon find out.
It is a day to celebrate.
We don't approve at all what's going on.
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily unusual.
Challenge your ordinary.
Not only the government, the municipality here has had no plan.
Experience the extraordinary with StarSat.
Hello. Being a legal practitioner in South Africa in these challenging times demands lawyers that will help clients beyond legal issues. The ever-changing demands in commerce and tourism require lawyers who have sound and clear business and commercial knowledge, and that's where Hammarsdale Incorporated comes in. Our business, mining, tourism, health, labor, and economic knowledge encapsulated with law and litigation experience gives us an advantage in the legal sphere. Our experience in assisting businesses, government, and various industries with their needs puts us amongst the many progressive and striving law firms in South Africa. Now, to contact our attorneys for assistance with any of the mentioned fields and others, please call us on 012-341-4187 or send us an email on admin@chabangu.co.za. MB Chabangu Incorporated, where problems meet solutions.
God is so amazing.
Feel the heat.
The Bible says that through his death on the cross, we are now reconciled with our Father.
Forgive and you shall be forgiven.
So wherever God takes us, we're just excited about it.
As a child of God, where you are, you must have an hour of prayer.
Feel the excitement.
In the name of Jesus, in the name of Jesus.
I believe that God is working right now.
Feel the heat with StarSat.
A revolutionary struggle veteran has fallen at the age of 95. We mourn the demise of one of the 8 Livonian trialists who stood in the dock in the Palace of Justice in Pretoria while awaiting their sentence on sabotage charges. This monumental event took place on the 12th of June in 1964, and it is considered to be the most significant political trial in the South African history. Mlangeni was one of the key defendants who ended up being detained in solitary confinement for 2 decades in Robben Island. Today, we celebrate his journey as an astute struggle hero and the last remaining Rivonia trialists. Sithi hamba kahle mkhonto.
Welcome back, welcome back. I want just maybe to share some few aspects again while we are dressing up and preparing our guest who will take us through the last 1 hour of our show, celebrating the great African history and how we become part of one nation as a greater African Al-Kebelam tribe or Edenites or Kushites or Ethiopians, whatever you want to call us. But it will be very nice next half. So please get yourself some cup of tea and get ready. Our guest is almost in the building so that we can be taking you through. But When we're doing all this conversation, I wish to remind us as Africans, I'm not standing here alone. I'm standing on the shoulders of the ancient people who have been saying the same information. We are looking at the Marcus Garveys of this world. You are looking at the other Pan-Africanists who have gone ahead of me. The Sankaras who have done what they've spoken in the past, the Kwame Nkrumahs, the Julius Nyereres, the Nelson Mandelas, the Madibas, the Mugabes, the Nyereres, and Masheros, and many others, many others. We may not agree with everything that they did. We may not agree with some of the policies that they did. And we may not agree with some of the friendships that they had. But I think that if you pick up elements from each and every one of them, intelligence will tell you that all of them contributed drips and draps. Not only that, if you can even look way into the past from the histories that we have from the Mansa Musas, the King Nangashes, for example, the Queens Tifitis, and many other queens and kings who have walked the width and breadth of this greater continent. Their information, therefore, needs to be consolidated. And I'm seeing some people writing for me and say, no, we hope that you are putting this information together. I can't do everything alone. This is where you also come into place in terms of assisting us, consolidating, transcribing, converting some of this information from audio into paper, into books, so that this information can move actually from just being spoken in oral into a mainstream formal education. And why do we say that? Because until we are able to harvest this information again and package it correctly, it will remain scattered here and there. By the time it is consolidated, we hope that this information can be able to make its way into our classrooms, and from the classrooms, it can filter its way into our media, it can filter its way into many other corners of education, so that as Africans we can begin to learn from ourselves, learn by ourselves, learn to ourselves, and learn with ourselves. Education therefore becomes key, because education informs. Education is the software. Education is the software. And when the software is right, then the hardware, the way in which we are working, will become perfect. As we are studying the greater history of the African people, the main purpose of our study, it is to celebrate it, to preserve it, and package it in such a way that it can become actually a useful tool for rewriting for the future generations. I know not everything that we are saying will be able to be utilized by this present generation, but we're already projecting into the future. That is, we are looking also into the maturity of our years. And there's the old age is now beginning to come close to some of us. We're beginning to say, what is it that we're going to leave behind for the children that are coming after us? So just after the break, let me take a small little break and drink myself some tea. Our guest is in the house, Sar Ahmadiel, all the way from Dimona in Israel. He's a Hebrew Israelite, an Edenite, and is the head of the organization there. Beautiful technologies that I want him to take us through. I'll be able to introduce you to one of my big friends. I went to Dimona there, spent some few days with him. He took me through the greater technologies of agriculture and etc. in the greater kingdom of Eden. And they say they are in east of Eden. So we'll have a beautiful, beautiful conversation with Sar Ahmadiel. You'll be joining us just after the break as we have a small little conversation with him. It's going to be an hour packed with information. So I want you to challenge you, please make some tea and make some water there. Get yourself some juice, sharpen up your ears, get an earbud and clean up those ears. Clean up those ears. We're going to be having a conversation with the Hebrew of the Hebrews, an Israelite of the Israelites. Please don't go away. We'll be back right after the break. Here your host, Maponga J, your program Sankofa.
God is so amazing.
Feel the heat.
The Bible says that through his death on the cross, we are now reconciled with our Father.
Forgive and you shall be forgiven.
So wherever God takes us, we're just excited about it.
As a child of God, where you are, you must have an hour of prayer.
Feel the excitement.
In the name of Jesus, in the name of Jesus.
I believe that God is working right now.
Feel the heat with StarSat.
The coronavirus outbreak.
Experience the extraordinary.
Tremendous waste and tremendous fraud. Mexico is, in fact, you will soon find out.
It is a day to celebrate.
We don't approve at all what's going going on.
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily unusual.
Challenge your ordinary.
Not only the government, the municipality here has had no plan.
Experience the extraordinary with StarSat.
Hello. Being a legal practitioner in South Africa in these challenging times demands lawyers that will help clients beyond legal issues. The ever-changing demands in commerce and tourism require lawyers who have sound and clear business and commercial knowledge, and that's where Chabangu Incorporated comes in. Our business, mining, tourism, health, labor, and economic knowledge encapsulated with law and litigation experience gives us an advantage in the legal sphere. Our experience in assisting businesses, government, and various industries with their needs puts us amongst the many progressive and striving law firms in South Africa. Now, to contact our attorneys for assistance with any of the mentioned fields and others, please call us on 012-341-4187 or send us an email on admin@chabangu.co.za. MB Chabangu Incorporated, where problems meet solutions.
Join me, Mpumalanga, on Inside Out on Galaxy. This is a show that helps individuals on how to deal with serious matters from the inside out. This is to help remedy the effects that depression seems to have in our homes, relationships, individuals, and even our communities at large. We will look at some of the devastating effects that depression has on media personalities, prominent people, and our own brothers and sisters. Some of our loved celebrities and musicians having had to go through depression and fought a losing battle. How can this be prevented and minimized? And what causes this? From the inside out.
Boom! There we are, back in Eden, with our guest in the house, Sar Ahmadiel, all the way from Dimona in Israel. And I don't want to waste any minute of his time. I want to squeeze as much as I can from him. There's a small little video clip that he wanted us to play just before we get started. We'll be getting that part out of the way. Then we can actually have a conversation with him. Let's get started. Who is Sar Ahmadiel?
Shalom, my dear brother.
Shalom, shalom.
Glad to be here again with you.
Thank you.
Sar Ahmadiel, first of all, giving all honor and praises to the Holy One of Israel, to his anointed son and servant, and all those that are in search of truth, just peace, mercy, love on this planet, in this dispensation of time, on this plane. I greet you, shalom.
Shalom.
Sar Ahmadiel is Minister of Information and a national spokesman for the African Hebrew Israelites at Jerusalem. We are those brothers and sisters that were moved based on the vision of Ben Ami back in 1966 that we should leave the land of our captivity, also known as America, and to journey back to our ancestral homeland, which we consider to be Israel, and we consider Israel to be in Northeast Africa. We don't subscribe to the idea that Africa ends at the Suez Canal. And so we are a community of nearly 3,000 there in Israel. We have thousands of followers throughout the world, across the U.S., in the Caribbean, and across Africa, including South Africa.
Because you are here for some few weeks, I would want to have a proper background. I might have to loop you back into the program.
Sure.
Much longer, the museum story that we had spoken about.
Sure.
But for today, maybe let's make it more historical, so that we can actually have some background of the journey itself from captivity into Liberia, into Israel. Can you give us a quick rundown of how this happened and how you end up where you are?
Sure. We can begin at any point in the circle of the continuity, but let's start with 70, the year 70, not AD, 70 CE, not BC, 70 CE.
Give us the difference.
AD is Anno Domini. It's a Latin terminology, and it's used to speak about in the year of our Lord, and it's really in the year of their dominion, the European dominion over the affairs of the planet. That's really that's the problematic idea of the term. It's a religious terminology, and so CE would be the common era, and archaeologically, historically, it is a more not mundane, but a neutral way to address that particular time. But 70, we're talking about the Roman occupation of the land of Israel, of Judea.
All right.
And that was when Rome scattered the Israelites from that particular area and other Northeast African tribes people, and we began to move southward. We began to migrate southward. We became refugees. We migrated down the Nile. We migrated down both banks of the Red Sea. We migrated across North Africa, and then some from that point deeper into Africa. And so a lot of us ended up in West Africa primarily, which is where the slave trade carried us into the Western Hemisphere. Many, however, remained here. Even Bantu have a historical or oral tradition and narrative that speaks of that type of a migration. Would be you Zulu, be you Xhosa, be you Bassa in the Cameroon, be you Lemba. So these threads lead back to Northeast Africa. So in the Caribbean, in Brazil, in Caribbean, in North America, particularly in North America, our people began to sing songs about the land of Israel. We sang about the River Jordan. We didn't sing about the River Niger, the River Gambia, the River Volta. We sang about Jericho, Jerusalem, and Canaan's land. We didn't sing about Mali or Songhai or Timbuktu. And this predates, a lot of people would say, well, that comes from missionary activity. It does not. Missionaries were not the first to teach Africans about the Bible. And this goes to the heart of the issue that a lot of our brothers and sisters, as they awaken, they want to equate the Bible as a white man's book. If that's what you really believe, then you are woefully uninformed about the Bible. You don't know about the Bible, and just say you don't know about it. I understand the sentiment involved in saying that something's wrong with the Bible or the way that it has been interpreted and used against us. But when you get into the text, it is thoroughly an African text. And there's numerous ways we can back that up.
Now that you mentioned already the text, my mind is moving towards the more academic story. But I wanted to enjoy the history. But now that you mentioned the text, you may want to assist our audience out there the difference between the original Hebrew text, the Abyssinian text, the Catholic text, and possibly the transliteration of the modern text. You are a scholar, so I don't think it's something maybe you can just give us, because some people think just the text that they're holding now is the only text, and it's held in its absoluteness, not knowing exactly what sort of shenanigan stuff what sort of editorials, what sort of mischief actually went behind the curtain. In as much as we say there's enough for our salvation, but granted. But how does this text become the basis of our history?
Well, I mean, that's a seminar. We could fill up this room with the different versions and volumes that have been that became the canon for what we know today as a Bible. And you have your offshoots and different denominations that use various books and don't accept variant books. So it was a translation. There were translations of translations, and so the original text would have been Hebrew. And that is something that, even going back to the idea of the Dead Sea Scrolls, this was the first time in 1947 that anyone had ever seen a copy of the different books, because that's what the Bible is. It's a collection of different books. It's not a book. 66 in the King James Version, and we could go on. There's the Apocrypha, there's the pseudepigraphal writings. There were writings that were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls that had not seen the light of day in 2,000 years. And so when you had original Hebrew writings...
I remember you taking me to the place where
Qumran.
Where the scrolls. So you see, you guys, I'm not just saying stories here.
No, we were there.
In the banks of the Dead Sea, and
that's right.
Looked up in the mountain there to see the picture of those caves.
That's right.
In Qumran.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were there. We went throughout the land, and we saw the original indigenous people of the land in Jericho and other places.
Yes.
Look like you.
Yes, we're sitting the Muslim Imam there.
Brother Ali in old city of Jerusalem in the Muslim quarter.
We've kept in touch with the family.
Yeah. So, and we're looking forward to having you back.
I'm coming.
But so there are numerous translations, numerous versions. Many of our people are so wrapped up in the Pauline doctrine of Christianity that they actually will accept a text that begins with Matthew. And they've done away with the so-called Old Testament. And of course, if you get a new car, what do you do with the old? If you get your wife a new dress, where's the old one? She gives it away, or it's not in the front of the closet anymore.
While the new is depreciating, the old is appreciating,
Right. Well, we've returned back to the old path, because therein lie the foundation and the roots. Because Yeshua himself, Yeshua, not Jesus, Yeshua himself said...
You're starting trouble there now. What's the difference between Yeshua and Jesus?
I'm a troublemaker. That's a seminar. But he said, he's on record as saying, if you want to know about me, search the scriptures. There was no Matthew at the time. There were no letters of Paul at the time. So what was he talking? What scriptures was he referring to? He said, is it not written? Was it not said? Written and said where? It would have had to have been a reference to the Old Testament.
Correct.
And so if we don't use that as our foundation, we'll be in left field somewhere. And that's exactly where many of the Eurocentric theologians and those who were interpreting that wanted us to be, all off in left field, because we have to recognize and realize that the roots of what we're talking about lie in the Old Testament. It's a book that you'll find Egypt and Ethiopia referenced 1,000 times at minimum. And so how could that be a white man's book? But the problem has not been the text. The problem really hasn't even been the translation of the text. We can find out where people made mistakes. But and there have been some malicious things, but the most maliciousness that has been pushed over through about the text has been in interpretation of
the text.
Cursed seed of Ham. We've all been taught that, and it's affected us. But you will not find in any version, King James or any version, you won't find any reference to Ham being cursed. It doesn't exist. And you won't find any version that speaks to anyone being cursed black. Now, being cursed white, you will find references to that.
Couple of them.
So there's a lot of things that have been twisted.
We'll come back to that maybe on another. Again, I'm already hearing a couple of
spin-offs here. Yeah.
How does a group of people leave America and move back to Africa? How does it start?
The most important number is one. You got to have the one. And so Ben-Ami, who was raised in America, with his Ben-Ami is Ben-Ami Ben Israel, He was born and raised in America. He was taught by his parents that he was an Israelite. And so in the early 1960s, he's part of a group, a community there in Chicago, and he's actually a teacher. And so he would ask the other elders, he said, well, if we're Israelites, when do we go back home? When do we return back to our land? And everyone would say, well, it's not time yet. We're waiting for this, we're waiting for that. That troubled him. It didn't rest well with his soul. In meditation and prayer, in the middle of two very, very what you call insurrections and riots in cities, Newark, Los Angeles, Watts riots and so forth, 66, 67, in the middle of a huge snowstorm in Chicago that blanketed the city, shut down the Midwest. He's in prayer and meditation on his bed, and he's visited by the angel Gabriel, who instructs him, it's time to begin the return of our people back to the promised land. He shares that with, reluctantly, of course, because in the beginning you don't want to be laughed at, you don't want to be, think you've lost it.
They start looking at you with weird eyes.
Right.
Do you have your tablets?
Right. But on faith, he began to share it with members of his circle. They didn't in any way blink. They actually came and brought assistance in the way of other passages that said when we return, we should return the same way that we left. We knew we left via West Africa. Where in West Africa can we return back? There was Liberia. Liberia, whose constitution required that they open their doors to any of us that wanted to return back.
Yes.
Liberia, who was established, which was established by returning Africans in the captivity. And so it was the perfect place. A couple brothers were dispatched to send and go check it out. Indeed, the president welcomed us.
Like it also happened with Moses.
Absolutely.
You go back and check the
Absolutely.
land.
And they came back with a favorable report this time. They didn't come back saying, oh, there are giants in the land. But there were giants in the land. The giants were malaria, dysentery, rainfall of 110 plus inches of annual rainfall each year. We had to dig our own wells. We weren't living in the comforts of Liberia, the capital city. We were 100 miles into the interior. And we had to dig our wells. You tell your children, don't play by the wells. Children being children, playing by the wells. They're afraid to come back and tell us that little Kana had fallen in the well until it was too late. So these were the kind of things that particular group of nearly 400 had to endure in 1967. They left America. That was the first migration, leaving in 67. 68.
Were they on a boat or flight? Or?
We caught Pan Am.
Pan Am.
They are defunct now. Pan Am Airlines flights from New York to Monrovia.
Okay.
Yeah, and so after 2.5 years, that number of almost 400 had dwindled down to 138. Attrition. They simply, it wasn't for them. They didn't have, if people join the Marines and the Special Forces, you have a fallout. In those, we hold no animosity towards
some
those.
Some went back, some died.
We had a handful that died. I think it was somewhere between 7 and 8 people that had actually passed away in the wilderness, as we call it, the wilderness. The remainder went back.
Went back to
Egypt.
It
wasn't for them. Went back to the comforts.
Went back to Egypt.
Yeah, and it is that. It's modern day Egypt. It's Babylon, and that's a whole story, Bishop, that we would love to cover. What is going on today and the significance of our move in 1967, and what that means for our people today. But nevertheless, in 69, let me back up a minute. 1968, Ben-Ami and one of the other brethren, Prince Kiskiahu, left Liberia and went and flew to Israel. And they went for the purpose of, again, spying out the land, to get some comfort level with what's going on in the land. And so Prince Kiskiahu was left there. Ben-Ami left him there. It was unknown to him at the time. He thought he was returning back to his wife and children also in Liberia. But he was left there, and he was given the assignment to immerse himself in that culture, learn the language, learn the lay of the land, so that when the remainder of the group came in a few months, that he would be able to assist. And that was the plan. You had a chance to meet him.
Yeah.
Hallelujah.
Yes. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. So, and by the way, hallelujah is Hebrew. It's the language of Hebrew, and we retained that in our songs, in our expressions. It was always there, even though we might throw in a thank you JC up in there, but nevertheless, but that's our history. And so at 69, we arrived there.
That's when I'm born now.
69?
Yeah.
Young man.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Bishop, that's historical.
Yeah.
We arrived in 69.
When
we
you
were
were
initially
arriving, I was arriving also.
You were arriving, no? And that's how we refer to brothers like yourself. You know, brothers like yourself, Benjamin used to teach us, he said, they're not born, they arrive. You know, they only come every now and then. And you have to hear them while they're yet in our midst.
Oh, thank you.
And so we're thankful for the Benamis, we're thankful for the Prince Chiliacs, we're thankful for the Bishop Mapongas, and we know the flack that you can get when you bring something that radically detours and may even turn you around, because indeed that's what Sankofa means, right? To go back and fetch something you left. If you have to do that, obviously you're in the wrong place.
Going back to the old paths. You're in a hurry, you left something important behind. Go
right.
back.
Go back and fetch it. So we're thankful for you and others like you. And certainly your testimony that the Creator is moving in this season to elevate those with that kind of message and voice, because the direction of our people has to change, and it can only change after the message changes. And so we want to assist you. I'm your Minister of Information, to inform, to give you ammunition.
Thank you. Our guest is here, Minister of Information, Sar Ahmadiel. Let's allow him to get a glass of water just to warm himself up. We'll be back right after the break from 1969. Coming this way, we hope before the end of the show, at least we'll have understood what is happening in Dimona and what sort of support is tracing a bit of our African history. He's got a beautiful archive, a whole museum that I had an opportunity of going through, which I think I'll have to pick up a day in particular, maybe in the next few weeks, and have that show fully for him. I need a whole 3 hours with him. We'll be back right after the break.
God is so amazing.
Feel the heat.
The Bible says that through his death on the cross, we are now reconciled with our Father.
Forgive and you shall be forgiven.
So wherever God takes us, we're just excited about it.
As a child of God, where you are, you must have an hour of prayer.
Feel the excitement.
In the name of Jesus, in the name of Jesus.
I believe that God is working right now.
Feel the heat with StarSat.
The coronavirus outbreak.
Experience the extraordinary.
Tremendous waste and tremendous fraud. Mexico is, in fact, you will soon find out.
It is a day to celebrate.
We don't approve at all what's going on.
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily unusual.
Challenge your ordinary.
Not only the government, the municipality has had no plan.
Experience the extraordinary with StarSat.
Welcome back. Our guest is in the house. We will plug in and put our USB cables and pull as much as we can here. We're 1969. And where do you arrive? In Tel Aviv, in Negev? How do you end up in Dimona?
We arrived at the airport it's Tel Aviv, basically. It's Ben Gurion Airport, just outside of Tel Aviv. At that particular time, we were initially welcomed under the law of return. The law of return simply at that time was very simple. You return to worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Well, initially, with that allowed us access to health care, to schooling, to work permits, et cetera, status. Within 9 months, the law of return was rewritten. And it was rewritten in a very creative way that said that you had to now have a Jewish mother, grandmother. There's 2 different laws that pertain to this subject, but we didn't, most of us did not fall in that category. And then they gave us the option of conversion. And conversion was not an option for us. It was not something that we would accept.
They want to convert you into Judaism.
That we needed Judaism, the religion.
Yes.
We are not Jews in the sense of being adherents to the Judaic religion. We are Jews only in the sense that that is where the terminology Jew comes from, Judah or Yehuda. And those are the people of the tribe of Judah, one of the sons of Jacob, whose name had been changed to Israel, or they are residents of the land of Judea.
Yeah.
And that's how we identified as Jews.
Yehuda.
Right, but we are not Jewish.
You're not Jewish.
No more than we're childish.
You're not smallish.
No,
Yeah.
no, not at all.
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
Or
You're
bigly.
not Jewish because you're not childish.
No.
Yeah.
And so that was problematic. We drew the line there because on principle that would mean that we would be really denying who we said we were in the first place, and that was not something that we were ready to do in the eyes of the Creator or in the eyes of the people. That was on principle we wouldn't do it. And so that set in motion a 25-year struggle of, again, another war of attrition, where we were not allowed work permits, we were not allowed access to health care, we were not allowed access to schooling. We were forced to develop inward and to develop our own institutions.
Wow.
Long story short, what that did was it actually put us in a position.
It empowered you.
It empowered us. It just in the same way that it was written, it said that when Joseph sold into captivity by his brethren, that the brothers meant it for evil, but that the Creator meant it for good. And so 25, 30 years later, we were able to say, oh, here's our healthcare system. It's preventive because we literally couldn't afford to get sick. So we developed our vegan diet.
Wow.
Since arrival in Israel, we became strict vegans. We began an exercise program that was mandatory for everyone. We created an environment in which all of these things could be done.
Yeah, and afternoons, people stretching and dancing.
Right.
There. Yeah.
How was the food?
Magic, stunning, sumptuous.
Our children can look at you. If your eyes are red, they'll say, Dode. Dode means uncle. Baba, you need some water. You know, so there's a health literacy that is trained in them from Yehi. And so herbology, preventive medicine. So we're very good at what we do. And we actually were enlisted for a 3-year project in Ghana by the Ministry of Health there to turn their paradigm of healthcare from curative, waiting until you get sick, to preventive. And so we have that experience. We were able to teach our own children, and we were able to discern the difference between training someone to be in a position to go get a job and uphold the existing system versus being dedicated to the service of the Creator, the creation, and your community and your people. And so that's the critical difference that we actually set in motion with our educational system. I can go on and on, but these are the kind of institutions.
How many people in Dimona, your population?
We're about 3,000, scattered between Dimona and 4 other cities there. And so, and there would be lots more if we were able to get the gates open, so to speak, to allow for those who identify. But we feel that we're in a point now, Israel and Judaism are going to have to come to terms with the fact that the vast majority of people around the globe who identify with Israel are actually like you and I. We've just somewhere in this complexion
lost a young
range.
lady a few days ago, Zinzi Mandela.
Yes.
And I'm reminded when I was walking through your archives there, the pictures of Winnie Mandela.
So Zinzi, we hosted Zinzi. We hosted Zinzi and her husband there.
And so did you host Winnie also?
Yes. Yes. Winnie came. It's her visit is available on YouTube. The testimonies that she gave when she saw what we had accomplished and what it represented for her and for the South African people, that she saw Dimona as, she said, our Mecca. And so, of course, that brings to mind pilgrimages. And so Jerusalem in the latter days was to be a pilgrimage site. It was, Isaiah said, many nations shall say, come, let us go up. Not that everyone has to say, I'm going to go and make that my new home, but that becomes our spiritual center from which would go forth light and truth and instructions and wisdom that can be applied in the long-awaited African ascension. That's our interpretation of that.
Powerful stuff. Take us to Eden. Where is this Eden?
Are we able to show that clip? Or we'll show it another time?
Yeah.
The clip I wanted to show was some of the crafty ways that the institutions of the Eurocentric world in history and archaeology and anthropology, how tricky they have been in identifying this location of Eden, and particularly the Garden of Eden, and they will confuse them. And so in going back to that identification, you got to deal with this issue of, it takes us all the way back to Adam and Eve. Now, of course, many of your viewers might think that,
let me hold it while you talk there.
They might find that to be unusual. They say, wait a minute, that looks like a brother and a sister there. And it is a brother and sister, and that's this is back during the unveiling of what was called the Out of Africa model for
And this was Newsweek
evolution. This is Newsweek, 1988. January 11th, 1988. This was their third largest selling cover story, or cover, this particular issue of Newsweek, an international magazine. And so the subtitle reads, "Scientists explore a controversial theory about man's origins." Well, why is it so controversial? It's controversial because they have to admit that the earliest form of modern human beings will look like us in the studio. And that's difficult in a world that's built on Eurocentrism, that's built on racist interpretations and ideologies. And that's as cut and dry as you can get. But the man whom Yah had formed, whom the Creator had formed, was placed in a garden that was located where? It said eastward in Eden. So in the second chapter of the book of Genesis, we find very clear references to this garden that was eastward in Eden. And it says, and a river went out of Eden and parted into four heads. And it names four different rivers. The Pishon, the Gihon, the Hiddekel, and the Euphrates. Euphrates is the only name that rings a bell in contemporary times.
Yes.
That's between Iran and Iraq. The Hiddekel, most Bible scholars will say that's the Tigris. But now the first two rivers, these Eurocentric scholars and theologians, they throw up their hands often and don't want to address it. And in the case of National Geographic, when they did a documentary, and when the History Channel did documentaries about it, they leave the scriptural references. They simply identify the last two rivers, and they leave the first two, ignore the fact that both of those rivers are connected up to Ethiopia in one way. One was connected to Havilah, and Havilah in Genesis, the 10th chapter, is identified as a son of Ham. Ham had four sons.
Cushite.
He's a Cushite. And Cushite that's the term for Ethiopia, a land of burnt faces, so everything points to Africa. The second river, it specifically says it wanders through, and the word is encompasses, it wanders through Ethiopia. So two rivers in Ethiopia, which was much, much larger in antiquity than the modern nation state of Ethiopia today. What two rivers do you have there?
The white and the blue.
The white and the blue Niles. But those scientists, those historians, those anthropologists, they like to conveniently leave the text where it points to that, and then they take you over near Iran and up to Turkey.
I went to the birthplace of the Nile.
Yes.
Right on Lake Victoria, in Jinja there.
And so all that is part of the promised land, the land that was promised to the seed of Abraham. From the Nile to the Euphrates is the definition of the promised land. And so the fighting...
the promised land is not just Israel.
No, absolutely not.
The promised land is Eden.
When you hear West Bank, well, wait a minute. If there's a West Bank, there's an East Bank.
And where's the North? Where's the South?
Well, in this case, the East Bank is where Jordan, the country of Jordan, is. And all of that would be all Iraq, all of that is part of the biblical promised land.
Yeah.
So we don't have to be fighting over, this is going to overturn and overturn and overturn as Ezekiel promised. It will overturn eventually. We just have to return back to righteousness, and that becomes the shield in which and the shield and which invokes the help of the Creator on our side. But again, going back to that idea of when he saying that was our Mecca, we've established a model in Dimona for African community development, for African social system, for economics that is fair, that does not have a situation where you have the haves and have-nots, a system of healthcare that is practical and makes sense. We're not worried about this corona. You know, we respect it. It's a real scenario, as we would say. Don't know if the virus is real yet. All that remains to be seen. But it is certainly a real scenario. But the reality is, you need to boost your immune system. Because you think COVID-19 is something, wait for COVID-20 and COVID-21. They're coming. You know, and if we are not preparing properly our temples by eating right and consuming enough of the right fruits and vegetables and herbs and seeds and grains and drinking enough water, the body's 75% water, not Coca-Cola, juice, tea.
Take me through your vision. Your vision as a Hebrew Israelite, if that is correct to call you.
Yeah.
What's your vision for Africa?
Our vision for Africa is that we have to turn aside from the direction, and I can say this, I'm sitting in the most advanced, the most developed country on the African continent. And I think there's a correlation between that fact and the fact that South Africa leads also in the corona implications in the epidemic. And so there's a connection there. There's something there for us to see and pay attention to. So what we're saying is that we have to stop, turn around, and go back again. And the moment that we do that, we're in first place. See, that world, that advanced, westernized world, it can't stop going over the cliff. Their leaders, their soothsayers, their prognosticators have already identified that they're going in the wrong direction.
There's a tip over.
They see it. Yeah. They see it coming, but if they slam on the brakes right now, they still will fall over the edge. We, on the other hand, have always been playing catch up. And that catch up was what was told to us and what was conditioned in us, that we wanted to be like them. Because if God had become in our subconscious a white man, then maybe that's why we're still following them in everything that we do and want to do, and wear the clothes and drive their cars and live in these neighborhoods that we built. We built these neighborhoods in South Africa that have razor wire and armed guards and dogs. But it's not an African idea. There's a few of us that do live in those, but that's not that, and we understand the dynamics of that. But this is not the African idea. We have to return back to something that we know would work for us and is in harmony with the Creator's wishes for us as people on the planet. That is what we're saying has to be the direction that we move in. We've got to, there's a word called less, and there's a word called share. And those two words we are going to have to bring back into our vocabulary if we expect to survive what is to come. COVID-19 has simply caused us to stop, to look at the direction that we've been heading in, and to reconsider. But unfortunately, it was more like everyone ready, on your market, ready, set, go, back to business as usual. It will not be a return to business as usual. There will be no normal. I would like to challenge you, Sar, in terms of the biblical text in particular, just to sanitize it. Yeah.
You are in a much better position to reintroduce to us the Hebrew Bible, the Black History Bible, so to speak, so that at least some of this information you're sharing could be available for those who wanted to like study and learn and find you more. If they are looking for you, where can they find you? If people are looking for your services and your, but I would want you firstly to pass a comment on the Black African Bible or the Hebrew Bible, and how that will make a difference between this KJV story that we have and the storyline that will actually celebrate our African history.
Sure. In short, and I know our time is ticking, but in short, if we were to simply read the text from the perspective that this is a story of an African people, and that this is not something that some whites dreamed up and tricked us with, that this is actually our history. When you read about Solomon and David and when you read about the laws of Moses, you will see, and I've had people to confess and say, I see my culture in there. This is how I was raised. This is how my grandparents taught us that that's an African culture. And so we, as a starting point, that's sufficient. We can provide the framework and the information going forward to make it relevant. But it's really very late in the day right now, and we need those of quick understanding to absorb this and then to realize that, hey, we need to turn around. We need to begin and pursue a different course and a different path. So we're able to bring, in fact, we start what we call an absorption class. It is, this is not something you join.
Where are you doing it?
We're doing it on Zoom right now.
Doing it on Zoom? You want to share some details? Maybe after the show, we'll upload the.
I'll give you the numbers.
Is it open for everyone?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. We can make that available. We've got lots of videos and messages that we've done that will give you the opportunity to absorb at your own pace. Like I said, you should be moving quickly. But we're able to again, this is not something you join. This is a calling. You identify with it. You don't, I'm not a Hebrew Israelite because I signed some documents. I know in my soul and being that was my calling and this is my mandate. But it doesn't deal with, it's not about genetics and bloodlines either. Because what made Abraham the first Hebrew? And if we were talking about a Hebraic bloodline, wouldn't you really be talking about a Chaldean bloodline?
No. To be a Hebrew is a calling.
It's a calling.
You're called into.
And faith. That's what made Abraham
the father of faith.
The father of being a Hebrew. He's the first Hebrew. And the father of many nations. And so similarly, in this dispensation of time, it's a message that you aspire to, that you hear. My sheep shall hear my voice, and a stranger they will not follow. So it's something. And meanwhile, Eurocentric Christianity has us looking for something. And what would we be looking for based on how we were taught? We'd be waiting on a white coming on a literal cloud
from the sky.
And so it's not about that. It's got to be it's got to be a movement. It's got to be men and women who recognize that we're going the wrong way, that we must begin to turn aside, and that's where we are in 2020.
You're cutting short in 1 minute exactly. I will need to bring you back. I will need to bring you back for a more thorough conversation.
Okay.
We can explore these various aspects of biblical hermeneutical interpretations for our generation. But your final parting shot.
I'm at the mercy of our president, who I'm waiting to hear any evening now say, my fellow South Africans, the airport is open. But until that
time...
My
daughter is stuck in London also.
Really?
She's trying to come back.
Until that time, I'm at your service. Parting shot. Our people have been convinced from Eurocentric theology, Eurocentric Christianity and interpretation of Scripture that we will die and then we will go either to heaven or hell.
Yeah.
Our understanding from a spiritual, not religious, big difference, from a spiritual understanding is that our people have already died and gone to hell. And the only thing that can await us is our resurrection.
My word.
But that's bad news, but the good news is that this is the season for our resurrection.
We cannot say it better than that. If you are still preaching the gospel that you will die and go to heaven, you're already in hell. You're already in hell. There better be a resurrection out of this foolishness and stupidity that has occupied us with Eurocentric colonization and all these forms of thinking that benumb the mind and reduce such a beautiful people of our Al-Kabelam and Africa, who constantly play into the space of weaknesses when in fact we are surrounded with power and such great amount of effort that we can put around us. And I'm so excited. I'm so excited to have had an opportunity of sharing this small little moment with you. And I feel tempted to ask, what is this with this dressing now? Just in passing. I mean, I can share my closing minutes with you. What's this beautiful dressing here? I see Gainyame there on your...
Yeah, Giname, the symbol, the Ghanaian Adinkra symbol that means accept God. There's nothing more important, more omnipotent, except God. And so we make our own clothes in Dimona. And so I saw a nice piece of fabric And I saw the brothers. I had the sisters to do the embroidery on it. And I had our sisters at home in Dimona to actually take the panels and to make me a nice suit. So I will put the order in for you.
My brother, after the show, I'm pressing my order right there. And the zitzi is on the side of the jackets and stuff like that?
We are commanded to wear fringes on the borders of the garment and to wear the cords of blue on the four corners. And you do see that on my garment, yes. That is according to the commandment in, I believe it's Numbers 15, that Moses instructed the children of Israel to forever wear that. It identifies our cultural wear. And so 24/7, this is how I carry it. I will always have fringes on my garments, even on my sports outfits.
Everything.
I'll have fringes.
Basically, you've come up with a new community altogether that comes from food. You've done your food, you've done your clothing, and of course, when you spoke about the Bible being an African text,
yes,
you got me jumping a bit, because I mean, how does a European interpret polygamy unless they are African?
But all the vast majority of traditional cultures in the world were polygynous, and so this idea of polygamy is monogamy is really something new, and they don't even practice that themselves. You know, they don't practice monogamy. They practice serial monogamy, marry, divorce, marry, divorce, marry, divorce, and they practice monogamy with mistresses and monogamy with prostitutes. So they're hypocrites. They're hypocrites. But what do you do with all the vast number of women who would go without a husband, except that they come into the fold of a polygynous environment? But it's our culture, it's our tradition, it's nothing new. Abraham had several wives.
Any projects that you're involved in on the African continent? Just maybe to speak on that.
We're very involved in organic agriculture. You know, that is the direction forward in terms of, you know, when you're vegan, you want the best fruits and vegetables. And so only by growing our own and being assured that they're not laced with the dangerous chemicals, pesticides, fertilizers, can you be assured that you're going to get what you need. We're very involved in, again, community development. Bename's model for community development was what we call the restoration village. These urban environments are deadly. They're deadly in the form of pollution and crime and violence. It's just a violent system. And so we want to return back to a village idea. You don't find homelessness in a village. No. You don't find the elderly put in a home in a village. They're in the midst of the family. They're part of the family. And so that's the idea. So a village is not an architectural construct. I'm not saying go back to, you know, something literally mud floors. We don't have to do that. It's a social construct. And if we return back to those ideas, I guarantee that we would be a much healthier, much happier people.
Community. Wow. One word for the governments of Africa?
Oh, that's, they need spiritual guidance. We hear corruption all the time, but you know, not giving them an out, not giving them a pass. The real corruptors of the earth are Europeans. You know, they are the ones who've destroyed the air, the ozone, the soil, you name it. We can't continue to follow behind and pattern ourselves after their ideas of democracy and constitutions, et cetera, et cetera. They need spiritual guidance. Wow. All the kings of ancient kings had spiritual men to guide them, and they've got to hear voices like yourself to bring them back.
I just got a call from the back office that the video is available, so they're going to be playing it on our way out.
Oh, okay.
So I want you to make the comment, because we will not have an opportunity to comment after it.
Okay.
So I want you to pass a comment on that video. I'll do my closing remarks. We close the show, but on our way out, then they'll play the video for us.
Okay.
So what is it that you want us to look for on that video there?
Again, the technology, you know, the technology that is applied by those who know better. And it's an obvious attempt to divert us from the truth that Eden is Africa. The Garden of Eden was in the area between the Nile, the two Nile rivers, and the Euphrates and Tigris. That was the garden that was eastward
of Eden.
In Eden. And so where we are now,
we're in Eden.
We're southward in Eden. When we go to Ghana, we are westward in Eden. And so they want us to believe that by the time that clip finishes, they will have taken you away completely from the references that speak to Ethiopia and the rivers being in Ethiopia, and then they want to throw up, they said the rivers are non-existent. Who said they're non-existent?
Where did they go?
Where did that come from? Those rivers are very much in existence, but the idea of yielding, again, it's a controversial idea that we came out of Africa and that all humanity evolved, not from apes and monkeys, but that we evolved from a black root. That's what's controversial and problematic.
There you have it from Sar Ahmadiel all the way from Dimona in Israel, taking us through some paces on celebrating the great African history. We are the original. We are the real melanin people who give birth to this world over. We are the mothers of civilization and beyond. And I'm so excited and thankful for the time that you have spent to come and see us here. We will surely bring him back. Just give me a few days. Let me work on my schedule. I will bring him back. If need be, I can maybe do an hour, or I can block off one Sunday and do all the 3 hours for you. From me, your host, Maponga J, your program is Sankofa, Chigaramboko, Garamashamba, Huda, Chiranavana, Vanjima, Kumbomana, Mwisendewe Shan, Wanachigarama, Matanda, Novora, Chiranavana, Vanji. Tiswanam Shambane Gore. Until we see you again, we'll meet you on your program, Sankofa. Enjoy yourself. Don't do what I wouldn't do. If you do it better.
Hallelujah. It seems that archaeology and the Bible agree that something spectacular happened around 7,000 years ago. So are the stories of Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel just myths? Or could they simply be the Bible's version of this Neolithic revolution? And if so, did the Garden of Eden really exist? One of the most important pieces of evidence to show that Eden did exist and where it might be located has been staring us in the face for generations. It's just that in recent years, we haven't really bothered to take it seriously. The crucial passage which pinpoints the location of Eden is found in the 2nd chapter of the book of Genesis, and it's a fairly straightforward, matter-of-fact geographical description. No miracles here. God planted a garden in the east of Eden, and there he put the man he had fashioned.
From the soil, God caused to grow every kind of tree, enticing to look at and good to eat, with the tree of life in the middle of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. A river flowed from Eden to water the garden, and there it divided to make 4 heads. The first is named Pishon, winding all through the land of Havilah, rich in gold. The gold of this country is pure. Bdellium and Shoham stone are found there. The second river is named Gihon, and this winds all through the land of Cush. The third river is named Hiddekel, and this flows to the east of Asher. The fourth river is the Perath.
This is a very information-rich piece of text. Perhaps most important of all, it tells us that we should be looking for 2 places, not just one. First, there's an area called Eden, and we have a number of geographical clues as to where that is. And second, we're looking for a garden, which is in the eastern part of Eden. The Bible informs us that Eden's whereabouts is tied up with the location of 4 rivers. We've always known the identities of the Perath and Hiddekel. These are the famous rivers the Greeks called Euphrates and Tigris, flowing through ancient Mesopotamia, now modern Iraq. The problem has always been identifying the other 2 rivers, the Gihon and the Pishon. Early church scholars read in Genesis that the river Gihon flowed through the land of Cush. But where was Cush? The only Cush they knew was in Africa, south of the land of the Pharaohs, in what we now call Sudan and Ethiopia. They therefore assumed that the Gihon had to be the Nile. Of course, if the Gihon was as far away from the Tigris and Euphrates as the Nile, it made sense to look much further afield for the Pishon. And so they decided on either the Indus or Ganges rivers in the Indian subcontinent. As a result, early scholars concluded that Eden encompassed the whole of the ancient world, stretching all the way from Africa to India. But this surely isn't what the Genesis text is telling us. we read that mankind was banished from Eden, exiled to eke out a sorry existence beyond the boundaries of the earthly paradise. So the boundaries of Eden can't possibly encompass the whole of the ancient world. If we're to find Eden and its fabled garden, we need to be thinking on a very different scale, something much smaller and more specific. And this is the modern view. Scholars today believe that Eden was located where the Tigris and Euphrates once joined two other local rivers, flowing out into the Persian Gulf, and where, conveniently, the first signs of human civilization appear in the archaeological record. But however convenient this might be, I'm not convinced they're right. There's a crucial clue here in the original Hebrew text of Genesis 2. A river flowed from Eden to water the garden, and from there it divided to make 4 heads. The Hebrew word for head is Rosh, as in Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, which actually means the head of the year. In other words, the beginning, not the end of the year. So in Genesis 2, where the plural Roshim is used, I think it has to refer to the beginnings, the sources or headwaters of the 4 rivers of Eden. We should be looking for Eden, where the sources of 4 major rivers diverge from the highland watershed, not where they emerge into the sea. The sources of the Tigris and Euphrates are located in a mountainous region between eastern Turkey and western Iran. If I'm right, Eden must be somewhere around here, and so must the headwaters of the other 2 rivers.